going to answer as many questions as we can, but essentially, you do have to make up your own minds.
Yeah, should we maybe go for another question? Or did you want to say something?
Yeah, there was, on this, and I completely agree, and as a litigation lawyer, I certainly can argue the facts one way or another, and have occasionally done so. But in this, there are certainly opinions, and there are facts that you can, again, as Nicola said, put the most spin on. And as a lawyer, I have the one. If we're doing a sort of I confess to the part of the thing that was said by the No campaign that I didn't agree with, was when it's been said that Scotland couldn't get into the EU. As someone who studied EU law, I don't think that is right. I think the question, though, is how long, and on what basis. And most of the issues that have surrounded the campaign so far, I think, have been issues that you can argue one way or another. However, in the last week and more recently, I would say that that does not apply to what the Yes campaign, the SNP, have been saying about the NHS and the potential, the supposed threat posed by a no vote in relation to spending and the Barnett formula. Yes, there is privatisation of provision of NHS services in England and Wales, but they are funded by the government. Funding, in fact, is going up. That means that there is actually increased funding for the NHS in Scotland. So that, however, I think, and solicitors, yes, as well as politicians and newspapers, are very, very cautious about using the word lie. I certainly don't like to use it, but the fact that it has been used confidently regarding these claims, I think people should take note of. And unfortunately, on the care home issue, I don't have any idea, but all I would say about that is that the idea that the UK has been so bad for Scotland in the past, but after independence is going to be so good for an independent Scotland, I think is one of the illogical arguments that surrounds some of the rhetoric from the Yes campaign.
Okay, thank you, Kat. So, yes, maybe we could take another question from, yes, over there. Yeah.
Thanks. There's been a lot of talk just now about truths and about facts and about us being able to make up our own minds. I noticed Nicola said an independent Scotland would be the 14th richest country in the world. The Better Together campaign in this leaflet tonight quotes Scotland as being the 45th, underneath Finland and Pakistan. I wonder how you can explain that and help us when it is difficult and we are looking for truth. Here tonight we've got two conflicting. Which is it?
Yes, you're right. There are a few tricky figures out there.
Is it the 14th or is it the 45th?
Excuse me, Chair. Sorry, there's someone's child next to her. I think she might just need a wee bit care from the mother. I think it's Emma and the child's Nina.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Sorry. Should have worn a wig.
That's your entertainment for them.
She looked like she was...
I'm happy to answer for the Yes campaign. I'm struggling to work my way through the Better Together booklet to find the 45th claim. I'll explain where the 14th comes from. I'm happy if you want to give me your email address to send you the link and the source to this tomorrow so you can look at it yourself. Yeah. I'll let Better Together. What I was just going to explain is 14th is a figure based on our gross domestic product per head of population, which is a standard measurement of a country's wealth. So you add up everything your economy produces in a year and you divide it by the number of people who live here, and that's where we are 14th. In that calculation, the UK is number 18. Not a bad position to be in, but an independent Scotland would be 4 places above that. I don't know where the 45th comes from. I'll let Kez or Kat explain that. All I would say is put the figures. Okay, yeah, I still don't know where that comes from. But all I would say is it's size of economy. So they're not taking account of population. So, you know, Pakistan's a bigger country than Scotland. So, of course, it's, you know, that's why my figure is credible, because it divides your economy by the number of people who live here. So you get you know, that's just taking it by size of population. What I was going to say is put the figures aside. does anybody, and going back to Larry's point about you coming to your own conclusion, you're all intelligent women. Do you really, using your intelligence and common sense, do you think it's credible to say that Scotland is poorer than Pakistan? I mean, I just pose that question. Is that a credible thing to say? But you're trying to suggest that it is. You're saying Pakistan would be the 40 world. It's a table. It's on page 10 of the booklets that's on your table, but it doesn't factor in the size of population. So, you know, I'm happy to back up my figure. I think people will struggle to back up the figure in here, is all I will gently say to my colleagues here this evening.
Well, what a gauntlet to be thrown down. Yes, they are two different figures. One is about per head capita, and the other is the size. I think what I would say in relation to the GDP is that gross domestic product, and I preface this by saying I'm not an economics expert or anything like that. I'm only a lawyer and a potential wannabe politician, but don't hold that against me, either respects. So, however, GDP talks about all of the money that is generated in this country. However, not all of that money stays in this country. When it comes to it talks about the national income that is kept in this country, it is significantly less. When you look at, because the GDP figures include oil and gas. Well, no, I figured, I know it's right in the context of what it is. Perhaps the implication. Sorry? Well, but nobody's. But I would say that the question is not to go into why your stats are different. The question is really trying to help people. But that's not saying that it's GDP. I mean, it says GDP, but in terms of its size of the economy. Which is more important to us? How can you make a decision when there's so vastly? Oh no, I would. The figure is correct, and while I understand that if you read it in that context, it probably is misleading. I'm not going to deny that. But to say that it's about the size of the economies of which the table says. But what I'm saying is that GDP, and using that as a figure to say that Scotland is as independent would be the 14th richest country in the world, I think is also misleading, because it ignores the amount of money that goes out of the country with the oil companies which are not Scottish, or with other countries which are based in the rest of the UK. And those are the figures which, unfortunately, I can't tell you. And if you use this alternative measure, and I'll say this, it's not within this pack, but within some of the information I've had from Better Together, is that we are ranked 20th on that scale when it talks about the money that's kept in Scotland and doesn't go elsewhere, and that we rank below the UK. Sorry?
20th is pretty good.
Yeah, I don't deny that, but what?
Not 45.
I unfortunately. Unfortunately, I wasn't in that meeting, and those decisions were made way above me. And you know what? I'll take your point. But again, it's the most positive spin, as Nicola says. Some of the facts and the figures are used by the Yes campaign in a particular context. Might make one say one thing and some might be the other.
I'll come over to some of you who are over there in a minute, but can Larry just, sorry? I was just going to let Larry speak.
Okay. Go for the question.
Thanks. I think it's important to talk about wealth and where it stays and stuff. Now, I just want to say this very quickly. I think everybody's played Monopoly, and you've all done that thing where you've got Mayfair and Park Lane and you've banged hotels on it and you've come to near blows with your family and friends, right? Or you've skinned them. And then you pick up that card that says, there is a tax on each of your hotels and houses. Remember that one? And you've got to mortgage everything in order to stop going under. Now, Monopoly was invented, I believe it was by the Quakers originally, in order to show the folly of capitalism. And what they proposed instead, and what I would like to work for, along with whatever party will represent me, is something called a land tax. And that is where the people that own this country of ours get taxed on how much wealth they have. Now, what do you think the chances of me getting that through a Westminster Parliament are?
Thank you very much. So yes,
from Monopoly to Larry's quick answer to this question as well.
I'm not going to disagree with that, actually. I think the question, if there's something you're passionate about, where have you got more chance of persuading people to listen to you? And I think the way democracy works at a devolved Scottish Parliament shows that politicians, political parties, the Parliament listens to people more here than it does in the Westminster system. But the one thing I was going to say, and I don't want to throw more figures in, and I don't want to throw more tables in, I just want to ask, is money the most important thing? Is that the best way to measure the wealth and health of a country? I've got a table here from The Economist, which is not a publication that's particularly left-wing, which is about the best place to be born, the best countries in the world to be a child. And it's dominated by small countries. It's dominated by small democracies which allow themselves to spend their money, their wealth, on issues that matter to families. And, you know, for me, I think becoming a country which is high up on the scale of where to be born seems to me like a more important thing than where you are, 6 points here or there on your GDP. It's what you spend it on that matters.
Great, thank you.
I would agree with Larry on that. When you look at the Scandinavian countries, I see a lot there that I would like to replicate here in Scotland. I spent some time earlier this year in Finland looking at the Finnish education system, in Helsinki in particular. But it's not so much that all those countries in the Scandinavian countries are small that they have in common when it comes to these tables. It's their tax levels that make the difference. They're willing and prepared to pay a lot more tax in the Scandinavian countries, and for that they get much better quality public services. And I would like us to have a conversation in Scotland about tax, because if we want to see those better services, then we have to have a conversation about how we fund them. And that takes me on to the point about land value tax at the back. Believe it or not, there's a Labour campaign for land value tax. There's been people in the Labour Party fighting for that for a very long time. And it's something, and I think the Greens actually in Scotland back a land value tax as well. And there's a lot in it to like, actually, because the amount of property that you have and the value of your property determines what you pay. And I think that there's a potential in that for a solution to reforming council tax, right? Because council tax in this country, and the freeze of council tax in particular, is incredibly regressive, because the SNP government have frozen the council tax freeze for the past 7 years, and the people who have benefited from that the most are the people with the most expensive houses, right? So if we want to reform local taxation, we have to look at models like that to make sure that the wealth is incorporated into as much as how much your property is actually worth.
Thank you very much, Kezia. I think there's someone at the back. Is this a comment or a new question? Or?
It is a new question, yeah. A quick one, really. As a cautious person, the vote that's coming up is quite a dilemma. That's why I'm here tonight. But one of the things I wanted to ask is, if something like the bedroom tax is put in place, which many people in the room hate, how would we tackle that if we weren't independent in terms of making things different here in Scotland? Would Devo Max give us an opportunity to challenge that as independents would?
Yeah, and I think we're probably united in this room against the bedroom tax. Unless somebody wants to stand up and argue for it, they'd be very brave indeed, I think. When it comes to more powers for the Scottish Parliament, one thing that all the political parties in Scotland are agreed on is the devolution of housing benefit, and that would mean that we would never be in a position again where we would have a bedroom tax imposed on us. It's also worth highlighting that the first person to put forward a mechanism for scrapping the bedroom tax in Scotland was Jackie Baillie, a Labour MSP in the Scottish Parliament. Yeah.
I think you were just saying that it doesn't have to be the bedroom tax, but anything like that, sort of welfare-wise, and yeah.
Yeah, so I took your question too literally, but that would be my answer to that would be is the devolution of housing benefit in particular. There are more powers coming to the Scottish Parliament, but the thing for me that's most important about this debate is not what power you have and where it lies, it's how it's used. So I would ask you very carefully to look at the white paper and what it says about welfare and social security, because I hear a lot of very positive rhetoric from the Yes campaign saying all these horrible things that the Westminster government are doing around benefits would not happen in independent Scotland, yet they have failed to set out an alternative model, and they have some ideas about it because they have a separate welfare group that have been working on it, but even those proposals that they've had experts look at haven't been costed or modelled. So there's a big promise up in the sky and no detail down on the ground, and you've got to have a look at that as well if you're buying into the promise that somehow welfare and social security would be better in independent Scotland.
Well, I mean, I'd make a general point before I go on to the welfare point that, you know, and I always say this to people arguing for an open vote, because very often it becomes a debate about SNP policy. Do you know what, if you don't like SNP policy, it's not an argument to vote no, it's an argument maybe not to vote SNP in the first election in an independent Scotland. Labour, if we're independent and, you know, sort of mutual appreciation society, Kezia is somebody I've got a great deal of respect for, incredibly talented, will be a big force in the Scottish Labour Party. Kezia would be perfectly able of coming up with Labour policies in an independent Scotland. But on welfare, on the bedroom tax specifically, what we are doing in Scotland on a cross-party basis is mitigating the bedroom tax. So we're taking millions of pounds from within our fixed budget from other areas to compensate people who are hit by the bedroom tax. Now, I think we're right to do that, but we're not abolishing the bedroom tax because we don't have the power to do it. So unless people actually claim that compensation, they're still legally liable for the bedroom tax. And also, the bedroom tax is a horrible, iniquitous tax, but it is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the welfare cuts that are being imposed by Westminster. You know, the change to disability payments that is about to take place, there's about 190,000 people in Scotland, disabled people who are getting what's called disability living allowance. The move to a new system is going to lead to more than 100,000 of those 190,000 losing some or all of their disability support. That's massive. And they're going to lose about £2,000 a year. Now, we can do nothing about that right now, and I want us to be able to say we're not doing that because we want to take a different approach to protecting the most vulnerable in our society. And the last point I would make is about tax. I mean, in any democracy, you will have a debate about what level taxes should be set at. But before in Scotland we go anywhere near a debate about taxing people more, we should make sure the taxes we already pay are spent properly on things that we actually want. Let me just give you two examples. If we didn't contribute money to weapons of mass destruction and we didn't contribute to the cost of the House of Lords, those two things alone would save over £500 million a year in Scotland of money we're already paying through our taxes. Money that we could spend on things like childcare, on helping people with the disabled. So, you know, let's make sure the taxes we already pay are spent properly before we go into further debates about tax. And there's a lot more we can do if we get control over the resources we have as a country.
Forgotten what I was going to say. On that, I mean, yes, there are taxation is about choices. But one of the key things up front and centre of the white paper is a 3% cut in corporation tax. Also, I would argue that, as Kezia's already said, the choice is made, and I know that you can make the argument that the independence is not about the SNP, but the independents are quite a lot to do with the SNP, is that in the last 7 years in government, they have had control over a few of the different kind of choices of benefits and taxation, and those choices have been to extend benefits which had already affected those in the worst off in our society, and they extended it into the middle classes. But, the council tax freeze, there were, and prescription charges as being two that I can think of off the top of my head. These are about choices, and just because we would be independent doesn't necessarily mean that we necessarily make better choices. We need better governments and better policies, yes, but I don't think independence is needed and doesn't guarantee that.
Can I just answer that? Kat said right at the beginning that people, that some people have believed in independence, whatever. Independence in war, independence in peace, independence before we had oil, which I think is actually rather admirable independence after we have all. See, if you changed every single one of those things you said to democracy, people have believed in democracy in war and in peace. People have believed in democracy before we had it all and after we had it all. You know, people would believe in democracy, whatever the answers were to all of these questions. I do agree with you that we're not going to solve these things unless we make good choices. The thing is, I'm pretty sure everyone here, like you said, no one stood up to say, I think the bedroom tax is a good idea. People in Scotland already made that choice. We've made a good choice. We think that's a bad way of changing welfare. I don't think anybody here is going to stand up and say, yes, let's strip disability living allowance from half the people who get it. We are already making these choices, and they're not being reflected in the governments we're electing and the policies we're getting. So it's not that I think that we would inherently make better choices when we were independent. It's that I think our government, our policies, and our society would be able to reflect the choices we're making. And that frankly, if we don't like the government, we can kick them out. If you don't like the policies that are being put in the white paper to show what we could do, fine. We'll have manifestos from lots of parties at the first general election, and you don't have to elect Nicola. You can elect Kezia. And I agree with so much of what you're saying. Absolutely. Independence is about democracy, and it is about choices, but it's about the choices reflecting what we vote.
Hello. I understand that the proposed alternative to independence is further devolved powers for Scotland. Under the current Scottish Government have already done great things with those powers, the ones that we do have. Just the contrast between the Scottish and the rest of the UK NHS, for example. If Devo Max or further devolved powers is real and is worth talking about, why don't we already have them? If they were real and they were the best thing for Scotland, wouldn't giving us them this side of the referendum effectively win the No campaign their argument?
There's a lot behind that question, because there's a really interesting debate about why it was just an independence referendum, why it was yes, no, and why there wasn't a third option of having more powers on the ballot paper. And the truth of that is, and I hope it is a truth that we can all unite behind, is actually neither side wanted that, because for the yes campaign, that might have put to bed the idea of independence being delivered, and from the no campaign, for some people who wanted to vote no and keep the union, that was a step too far. So you had a bit of a political fudge and a muddle there, which meant both sides didn't want the third question on the ballot paper, which is why you didn't get it. I'm going to address the other part of your question, which was about, if you want more powers and everybody agrees on that, why don't we have that already? Well, there are powers that were passed in the Scotland Act in 2012, which come into effect in 2016. So in a way, we've already gone through a process of looking at what additional powers the Scottish Parliament could have and use, and some of those powers are on the way. That wasn't strong. Pardon? Well, part of it was a very complex thing around income tax that I would probably struggle to spell out to you tonight, and there were some other things in there as well. But I was going to come on to the second part of that, which is what more powers would come now. So what you've got now is a situation, you've got three different political parties in Scotland with three different ideas about what those additional powers would be. The reason why they don't all unite on that, and the reason why you're not going to know the answer to that before you go to the polls on the 16th, is a very complicated. I've said it was the 16th. I've said it was in December as well, and the only thing I'm doing just now is campaigning.
I'm quite happy for all no voters in the room to think the referendum is the 16th of December. Okay, did you get that? It's the 16th of December.
It's completely thrown me that altogether. Go and tell me your question just again really quickly. So there's a social Scottish, that's what we're There's a big survey of Scotland that's much bigger than any opinion poll that you see, and it says that I think it's something like 62% of Scots want more power for the Scottish Parliament. And then that study has asked someone, well, what powers do you want? And they say health and education, and they don't realise that we have those powers already. So actually there's a huge misunderstanding in Scotland just now about what powers we have and what you can use them for. That's a bit sad actually after 15 years of the Scottish Parliament that we don't have that full conversation about the nature of powers that we've got. The reason that you don't have a clear picture, I will stop talking, I promise you, it's about the fabric of what you end up with across the whole United Kingdom, right? From a Labour perspective, there is a balance between the powers that we have in Scotland and the powers across the rest of that remain with the rest of the UK when it comes to sharing what we've got, right? So I think when it comes to tax and welfare, you want to keep that linked largely because you want to be able to tax the wealth across the whole United Kingdom where it exists so that you can share it. I want to be able to tax the southeast of England and London where the wealth is, and I want to be able to share that wealth across the whole United Kingdom. So I wouldn't argue for devolving all taxes, for example, because in doing that, I would lose the ability to tax the bankers in London, and I want to be able to do that because I'm a socialist, and I think that they would need to give up a wee bit more of what they've got, right?
That's worked really well for you in the past.
Well, and one of the things that we're proposing just now, the Labour Party is, I stand here as a Labour Party person, is a tax on bankers' bonuses, and we have said that we would use that money to create jobs for young people. Now, if we devolved all those powers over tax to the Scottish Parliament, we would be able to draw on that wealth and have that same additional funds. That's the perspective I take it from. Did that answer your question?
The last thing I would say on it is that maybe we are very clear on what powers we already have and what there is to gain. However, Nicola in her opening speech did touch on many powers, which I think anyone in this room would say, those should be, we should have some sort of say, some sort of, real working democracy to be able to make decisions on those things. They are important to us. It seems to me like the messages, vote no to, give all your powers away and we'll give you some of them back.
As somebody who believes in independence, I nevertheless understand the kind of attraction to having more power short of independence. I've got 3 issues, I think, with that. One, the powers that are on offer, such as they are, if you can sort of even manage to work out what they are very, very limited. We control in the Scottish Parliament right now 7% of all the revenue that's raised in Scotland, 7%. With the new powers that Kes talked about that are coming on through the Scotland Act, that will take us to 15%. I think with Labour's additional proposals, that would take us to something like 20%. So 80% of control over our tax revenues will remain at Westminster, even with the maximum that Kes's party is offering. Secondly, there is no agreement between the different parties, and Kes tries to say, and understand why she tries to say that that's not important, but when you go in to vote, that is important, because surely if you are thinking of voting no because you think you might get something else, you've got right to know what that is, and that it will be guaranteed regardless of what party wins the Westminster election a few months after the referendum, and you don't know that. And thirdly, I just think there's a bit of a credibility gap here, because the parties that are saying vote no and we'll give you more powers are parties that fought tooth and nail to keep the option off of the ballot paper. Now, well, Kes, I was in the negotiation about the Edinburgh Agreement, so I know what happened. Independence is my favoured option. That's what I wanted on the ballot paper, but we were open to discussion about a third option. The first meeting I had in the negotiation over the Edinburgh Agreement with the then Secretary of State, Michael Moore, he told me it was a red line issue. It wasn't going to be discussed. There was no way they were going to agree it. So, with that desperation to keep it off the ballot paper, are we really going to believe that after a no vote, Westminster, the biggest centralising institution known to women, is going to say, OK, Scotland, you voted no, but here's a lot of extra powers anyway? Call me a sceptic, but I just find that a bit difficult to believe. If you want more powers, and if you want the kind of powers that give us the ability, yes, if we make the right choices, because it's not automatic, but the powers that give us the ability to get our economy growing, to sort out the horrendous problems of inequality, there is only one option on the ballot paper that guarantees you those more powers, and that is the yes option.
I have the joy of iPads is that you can get answers to questions immediately. And I can tell you exactly what's coming next month, next in the 2012 Act, which is the ability to raise or lower income tax by 10p in the pound. And that applies equally across all tax bands. Other minor tax powers, including control of stamp duty and a landfill tax, ability to borrow money, and there's a few other things, including powers limited to drugs, driving and guns. Earlier on I was talking about how there are a lot of the Yes campaign side is about pros with no cons, and I don't want to fall into that same trap, which is saying that the United Kingdom is all pros with no cons. I recognise that as part of a larger country and as part of a larger democracy that sometimes you don't get the government that you want. I don't like that, but there you go. I don't live in North Korea. So, sorry? Well, I think it's fair to say that you don't always, in a democracy, well, in a democracy you don't always get who you vote for. 45% of people... I was saying that we don't live in a dictatorship, which is, you know, true.
It feels sometimes like that because what we've already heard tonight is that something around, so SNP or whoever can't say this is the policies of what's going to happen. So what you're saying is that we wait for our governments to tell us what our policies are going to be, rather than let's have a referendum and let's have a conversation about what we want.
That's not what I think. What I'm asking you to do, and I completely respect what you've just said, what I'm asking you to do is ask some harder questions, right? Because there's nothing inevitable about inequality being addressed with independence, but I would like to see a lot more detail about how we would do it in the white paper.
But I want the chance to say, this is how I think we should do it. I don't want my politicians to tell me what I should do. Because think about it, here we've got Nicola Sturgeon sitting here, who's the Deputy Minister of Scotland. My God, I just drove down here in my car, and here she is, and I can talk to her and she can hear me. But I don't have anyone from Westminster can drive to me to put me in a telephone on me first. So I can get on a bus and go to my Parliament and say, listen, this is what I want. I can stand outside and protest. I've got 2 kids. Can I get on a train and go down to Westminster? Take a whole day out. But I can get my husband to sit in tonight and look after the kids and get here. And then get heard. But I can't get to Westminster and be heard.
Yeah, like you.
Yes, but I don't trust that the voices are heard. There's so many times. There was 2 pictures that I seen. It was about a debate about Westminster MPs' pay. And we looked at how full the House of Commons was that day. And then there was a debate about disabilities, and you should have seen it. You would have heard a pin drop.
I've seen the same thing in Hollywood when I've gone to a debate.
Yeah, that's true.
One issue, the whole place is empty, and all of a sudden...
But I can still get the 31 bus up to the Parliament and say, get yourself in here, because I want you to debate for me. You can't do it. Yeah, you got it. Westminster, the doors are shut. It's an establishment and it's absolutely corrupt as far as I'm concerned, and I'm fed up with it and I want something different. Yes, it is, but I can still be heard. I believe I can still be heard.
Okay, thank you for that, but I'll just pass it back to
I just wanted to finish my point, because I think we would agree on a lot of stuff. I think there's a huge amount of political reform in this country that needs to happen. It's not just unique to Westminster, actually. It's as much an issue for our council chambers as it is for the Scottish Parliament. It's a bigger debate, it's a separate debate, but we need to have it. All I was trying to say to you was, if there was stuff in the white paper about how we were going to close the inequality gap in this country or tackle poverty, for the real detail of it, and we all voted yes, we would be giving the government in an independent Scotland the mandate to go out and do that. But if we vote yes, there's nothing about that vote that is going to make the next government step up to the massive challenges that we face. And I'm just asking you, if you're floating with the idea of voting yes, ask some really hard questions of the people that are advocating it, and to whether it will really address the poverty and inequality that you want to see closed. And just finally, if you're getting on the 31 bus to go up to the Parliament, stop off half the way at Mark Lazarovich's office and you'll see him on a Friday morning.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. we've only really got time for one more question, so I really want it to be for someone who's definitely undecided, and it's to be something really crucial for them that might make the decision. Okay.
I have a particular question for Kezia, and it's about lots of the things you've said tonight. So you were just talking about political reform. At the beginning, you spoke very well about women's rights, which I think everybody in the room would agree with. You spoke about land tax. So you spoke about the things that you would fight for in the Labour Party and that you would fight for in a Labour government. My question is that you are asking us to vote no for independence, and I guess you are then subsequently asking us to vote for Labour at the next general election. And many, many of us will have voted for Labour in Scotland over the past general elections, and that's not the government that we get, and they're not the policies that we get. So how can you stand there and ask us to support your ideas, which I do support and I do agree with, and then that's not what we end up with?
I mean, I kind of want to take you for a drink and we can kind of work this out between the two of us over a long period of time, because I think a lot of the answer to your question lies in what will happen after the referendum result, regardless of what the result is. Because I think in many ways politics has changed forever, or it could have changed forever if we grab it. And what I've seen is the left in Scotland, of which I count myself part of, although other people might suggest that I'm not, depending on what you think about the Labour Party, has got a new lease of life and a new vitality about it. But the thing about left politics is we're really good at fighting with each other, and we're really good at saying, oh, actually, your version of what we should do isn't as good as mine, or it won't happen, or whatever. So the day after the 18th, and I've got the date right this time, we all need to unite behind this idea of, if the priority is gender equality and getting women back to work and better childcare, regardless of how we voted at the referendum or at the last general election, we have to come together as women and work out what those policy solutions are. And there's a precedence for this, because this is what's happened in Sweden. If you look at the history of the women's movement in Sweden, it came out of the economic recession in the 90s, where women just said, finally, we've had enough, right? We put party politics aside, we've got a mandate for what we want to see and how we're going to change this country, and we're going to do it together, and we're going to do it through every mechanism we've got at our disposal, whether that be formal party politics, marching on whatever government it is of the day, or as a movement of people. Because I tell you something, the thing about this debate that frustrates me the most, no big battle was ever won by lawyers writing a constitution. It was movements of people. It was women, it was trade unionists, it was whatever else, and it's movements of people that I think will deliver the change you're looking for.
But you're speaking passionately, and my heart hears it. And why can you and Nicola not work together in an independent Scotland for those things? Why is that not more likely? And I am an undecided voter, but my heart says that with people like you in an independent Scotland, in power in an independent Scotland, Scotland is more likely to be a more prosperous and a more fair nation.
I'm probably about to hold Kezzy's career below the waterline here, but can I just say, I find the prospect, and it is a prospect, of an independent Scotland with Kez Dugdale as First Minister hugely appealing. I think that's great. And your question in many ways goes to the heart of this debate. Because yes, it's about choices, but it's also having the ability and the power to implement your choices. Labour has won every single general election in my lifetime, without exception. But for more than half my life, we've had a Tory government. And that's just wrong. Sounds like an anti-Tory point, and I am very anti-Tory, but it's not really an anti-Tory point, it's a pro-democracy point. We don't all individually get the governments we vote for. Some people, perhaps lots of people in this room, wouldn't have voted SNP at the last Scottish election, but collectively as a country, we should get the governments that we vote for. The parties that win elections should be the government, not the parties that lose elections. And what happens if we do vote no? And some people vote no in the hope that we get a Labour government 8 months later, and we don't get that Labour government. Scotland votes Labour again, but we end up with another Tory government. Where does that leave us in pursuing the priorities that Kez and I share passionately? Because I'm the Deputy First Minister of a government that doesn't have the power to legislate for what rate the minimum wage is set at, that doesn't have power over equality, so that we can properly implement the Equal Pay Act and make sure there's proper female representation on boards. Yes, it's all about choices. Politics is fundamentally about choices. But as Larry said, I thought very powerfully earlier on, we make these choices in Scotland. The problem is we don't get the ability to implement them. And it's the delivery bit that independence sorts. Not automatically, but it puts the powers in our hands to actually do some of these things that we think are right. At the moment, we don't have that, and that's the problem.
Thank you. I'm seeing that it's now 8:25, and I sense that there's... Okay, maybe, I don't know, that it all depends on Nicola. Can we, yeah, okay. Yes. Let's have one more.
I really need an answer to this, because I don't think enough has been said about the cost and the negotiations going to happen after the referendum if we get independence. Sounds very exciting getting independence. I've been a no, then a yes, got really excited about, this is really great. And then I'm wavering towards no again, and that's going to be my default position unless I get an answer to this, which is all the years of negotiation that's going to have to take place, right down to the last painting in the National Galleries, we're going to have to talk about all these things. And I think Yugoslavia is a precedent for, and they're still negotiating all the terms. So can you tell me what the cost is going to be? And even our defence is there's going to be huge holes in both Scottish and English defence, and English. I'm English, although I've lived here for 14 years. But I'm wondering what's going to happen to England as well. Where's that going to leave the rest of the UK? Yorkshire wanting independence, Yorkshire, Cornwall, Wales. What's going to happen?
Okay. I'm going to have a go at answering your question. If in the time I've got, I'm able to answer every single aspect of it, I'd be very happy to take your contact details and try to do that in the fullness of time. I'll start with your last point there about what happens to England. That's a matter for people in England. That's democracy as well. I happen to think independence for Scotland might be a good thing for England, because it might, although it's entirely up to them, make them look at their own democracy and where power lies. I also think it would be a very good thing for the relationship between Scotland and England, which is always going to be the closest relationship we ever have to another country. But sometimes, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody before anybody laughs at what I'm about to say, one of the things that frustrates me about Scotland is our tendency to blame London for everything that goes wrong. Independence is about taking responsibility and being, somebody once said that we stop being a surly lodger and become a best friend to England, and there's something in that kind of description. In terms of the transition, I'm going to deal with it in terms of timescales and have a go in terms of cost, so that's maybe where I need to come back to you, because there's various different aspects of that question. We've set out a timetable for the period between Scotland voting yes, if that's what we do, and Scotland becoming independent of 18 months. Now, we didn't just pluck that out of thin air. The process we went through is we looked at the precedents for countries becoming independent. Now, sometimes if I say this, it surprises people. It surprised me when I first knew it. In the period since the end of the Second World War, there have been no fewer than 150 countries in the world that have become independent. It's not actually an unusual thing to do. Of course, circumstances are very different. So we looked at the precedents. We looked in particular at I think it was around 30 or so countries that had become independent following a referendum. The average timescale was 15 months, and we consider 18 months is a reasonable period of time to do the negotiation around the key things that require to be negotiated and settled, things like currency and membership of the European Union, so that we can become independent. There are, of course, things that we will choose to have transitional arrangements on that take us beyond that, and sometimes because that will suit the rest of the UK as well as Scotland, and I'll come back to a particular example that illustrates that point in a second. In terms of the cost, some of that will flow from the negotiation. One of the big frustrations we've had in the Scottish Government is a refusal on the part of the UK Government this side of the referendum to sit down and sensibly talk about some of these things, not compromise our positions, but look at how we would start to go about some of this if there is a yes vote. There was a very good piece of work done, which I can send you a link to, by a professor at the London School of Economics recently, Professor Patrick Dunleavy, looking at transition costs. And he's looked at the different categories of costs, and he identified what he described as pure transition costs, things that you wouldn't otherwise have to spend money on but for becoming independent. And he put the estimate of that at around £200 million. He then looked at things that an independent Scotland would have to invest in, things like new computer systems. But he made the point, countries invest in new computer systems all the time anyway, so, and doing that, you're making an investment in delivering services more efficiently so you can get a return on that investment. But the other point I would make is, if we become independent, we're not setting up everything from scratch. And the example I was going to give you was around pension payments. Pensions is an issue that comes up often in this debate about, will my pension still get paid? And of course it will, because we fund pensions already. The responsibility for paying them would transfer from Westminster to the Scottish Government. But if I take the administration of pensions, every single state pension that is paid to a state pensioner in Scotland is currently administered from one of two pension centres. One of them is in Motherwell and the other one is in Dundee. So the infrastructure of doing that already exists. We're not having to set it up from scratch. We'll be in a situation of transferring the responsibility for that from Westminster to the Scottish Government. And we contribute our share of defence forces and every other reserved function that is provided by Westminster. We pay our fair share of that already through our taxes. We don't get any of these services for free. So, the welfare point was important for another reason, because our pension centres also pay a lot of pensions and other welfare benefits to people in England. So there would be a mutual reason why the Scottish Government and Westminster Government would want to make sure that there was a properly planned transition. So I know that's all very complex. I'm trying to get a lot into just a couple of minutes. I would be very happy to